started. So welcome to another Reltio community show. I'm Chris Detzel, and today we have two special guests that I'll introduce here shortly, and one that I'm extremely excited about. So the topic today is MDM as the launching pad for data governance journeys and value quantification. Today we have special guest Shri Salem. He's a global leader of data strategy at ZS, and we have Willem Koenders. Willem, how do you say your last name? I apologize. Should have asked you before.
Koenders. Just imagine it's two O's.
Koenders. Yeah. Okay. And then, of course, me. So certainly excited about this. Here are the rules of the show. Please keep yourself on mute. It's a live show. So all questions, for the most part, should be asked in chat. I will be the moderator today, as usual, and we'll ask those questions as they come up. And then we will record the show, and I'll post it to the Reltio community. I'll push the link out here shortly to where it will be posted after we get started. So coming up, we have today's show. And then on the 26th, which is next week, we have a Reltio release. It's for both customers and partners. So if you're interested in that, make sure you go to community.reltio.com, click on the events and then upcoming events. And on the 28th, we'll be talking about evolving data management, simplifying HCP and HCO data merges in life science. That too is a thought leadership show, just like this one today. And then on October 11th, a sneak peek into the world of RDM with Reltio. So certainly excited about all these coming up. We do have one or two more that's not scheduled yet, but that's in the works. And then lastly, Reltio is sponsoring in a big way Data Driven, which is a conference. It's a modern data management conference. We have lots of really good speakers and thought leaders within that. It's going to be, I live in Dallas, Texas, so right here in my backyard. So really excited about that. I'll push the link if you're interested in that. And if you are interested, I have a code to get you even more money off if that's of interest to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think one of you guys, I think Shri?
So I'm going to share the screen. Yeah.
Beautiful.
All right. So hope you're all able to see my screen. Sorry, I'm not on camera. So I've been having some bandwidth issues since yesterday evening. So I'm just trying to work through it. But hope you're able to see my screen and we can. And also hear me okay.
Yes, everything's good.
Okay, perfect. So let's get started here with some introductions. So let me go first and then we'll turn it over to Willem. So my name is Shri Salem. I'm a partner with ZS Associates and also a practice lead for data strategy. So as part of data strategy, I lead client engagements in strategy formulation, data value enablement through things like governance and building data foundations and helping activate new use cases through data innovation. And in my past life, I've also led the data office and the data strategy functions at other companies such as Danone and Coca-Cola. So super excited to be talking to you all. Willem, if you can quickly introduce.
Yep. Thanks, Chris, for having us. Great to be here. So my name is Willem Koenders. I spent all my working life around kind of data, data strategy and how to build a competitive advantage, based on data. I've done it a few years in Europe, a few years in the US, a few years in Latin America. I've actually been kind of dropped around a little bit in that sense and have done so. And I'm now doing so with Shri, both kind of at the highest level, data strategy formulation, down into operating model development and implementation, and then even further down into specific, say, platform implementations, regulatory governance programs, things like that, and throughout, with a strong connection to MDM platforms, of course. So yeah. I think with that, we'll go get started. We can go to the next page. Then there's two things that we really have on the, let's say, the agenda that we wanted to talk about, that they're related in sequence. But like the first point is, I want to talk about master data management and explain how, an investment in this discipline, developing it, will not drive maturity just in master data management, but also in other more broader enterprise level data maturity areas. And second, Shri specifically will talk about, then the connection into value quantification, right? Also outside of MDM, a very kind of hot topic right now. How do you actually put dollars to specific data efforts and investments? So with that, I'll start off on this first item, where the central argument is really the following, which is that MDM is an ideal candidate, to kind of be a foundational capability for an organization to either start or at least make sure that you focus on it early enough for three different reasons. Like one is because to do this right, and I'll get to what do this right means, you need to bring together a couple of different data governance disciplines. Then two, it has a very natural limited scope, right? Be it customer, be it product, but that's typically very impactful, again, because of the nature of master data and it giving context to the kind of the organization's internal and external transactions. And then third, using 1 and 2, it is an opportunity to try it out, learn it, learn the lessons, set the standards before you go into other domains afterwards, right? So those are the three kind of key reasons why it is a good candidate to kind of drive this initial maturity. And we'll unpack that a little bit more in the next slides. So first, and then this is very tricky for me not to spend an hour here, so I'll try to keep it kind of quick and maybe if there's questions later, we can like look at specific boxes. But like when we say MDM, like what's included, right? And then specifically, not just the technology or the platform, right? For you to again do it right, like there's quite a couple of things that kind of come to a successful implementation. And so top of the page, data strategy, think about MDM also as an asset or a trusted source, being aware of the use cases that drive it and being able to indicate and quantify the value. Then governance, the layer below it, policies and standards that are more at an enterprise level around this type of data. What are the expectations, the rules, the responsibilities? Then where policies and standards talks about the what great looks like, compliance. At some point you may want to check if that's actually happening in practice. Then the biggest chunk of the page, left to right, people, process, technology. From a people perspective, there's certain personas or roles that apply to MDM, but I guess a bit wider here, like data owner, a data steward, process owners, for example, system owners, or whatever is your kind of equivalent within your enterprise. And then to enable those people to have the right training materials, knowledge sharing, so that you can drive the actual adoption, right? So there's a whole people component to making sure that an MDM implementation actually works and picks up. Then the busiest box here with process, right? MDM, sometimes you think about it as one process, but there's really at least 12, different sub-processes that you can kind of string together. Data modeling is one, like defining the data attributes, the definitions associated with them. I'm not going to do all of them, but metadata management to make sure that you have a minimum set of metadata so that you truly describe them very well. Quality you want to measure, and then maybe one or two to call out at the bottom of the box. Remediation, like if you find that there's gaps relative between the requirements and what you want the data to be, then you can remediate some of these things directly in MDM. But then also to the sources, right? Which is sometimes a lot harder. Like getting data in is one thing, but once you've resolved and remediate it, how does it perpetuate back to the other sources? Then technology on the right, I probably don't have to explain this very much given the fact that we're here with Reltio today, but different components kind of come together here. The architecture around it, storage security, interoperability, very critical, right? When you look at it as a strategic asset, that the right people, the right processes can use it. A couple of other things still there. Workflows is also an interesting one as part of the process boxes in the middle. But then finally, at the bottom of the page, implementation. So all these other boxes I just kind of hopefully quickly enough step through, they're all static, right? They kind of they exist, but they don't do anything in and of themselves. Like, how do you take those and then start doing it? And so there's different ways to do it, and highly likely it's a combination of these kind of ways that are pointed out on the slide. Like, you could do it by domain, say tackling customer of a product or employee. Then there's transformational programs like maybe MDM, but it may also be more like a cloud migration or something else where you want to make sure the MDM is appropriately anchored in, etc. Right? So that's just I'm not sure if I did justice to it. I hope I did. Can come back to it, but like just when we say MDM and later on when we start to interpret, how can it drive maturity in the broader enterprise and how does it drive value? These are the things that come to mind, right? Just it's the technology, but embedding it in all these other things. So with that, then taking that argument a step further, like if we just step through of the what, like what is included in a let's say successful implementation, like those are the boxes that come to mind, the components that come to mind. But let's now take, I think, an objective, universally acclaimed framework like the DMBOK2 framework, which is the most detailed version I'm aware of how do you measure data maturity in a broader sense, data management maturity in a broader sense for any sort of enterprise. And then you see that master data is its own little slice of that pie on the left, at the bottom of the pie. But then there's these other ones where the argument being is, if you do it right, you actually make a ton of progress in those areas as well, just by the very strategic nature of master data. Same thing here. I won't drain every bullet, but just calling out a couple of things, right? Strategy to begin with. If your company already has a clear business strategy, or even better, a data strategy, then pretty sure you can reinforce it by saying, how does MDM make that even better? Like, how is that a foundational pillar there? If it doesn't have a strategy, well, here's your opportunity to create one, right? This is strategic data. You need to identify the use cases. You need to look at it like an asset. All of the, I guess, the right cliche words, I would say, but and kind of start building a pattern and muscle memory that eventually all bell up to value creation. Then governance. For a successful MDM implementation, like you need the policy and standards, roles, responsibilities. We just talked about it real quick on the previous slide, like data owners, stewards, quality analysts. And with that, also the data or domain owner, not just the MDM solution, let's say the governance roles and possibly the forums. Like you need them to sustainably drive master data, but they're exceedingly reusable. Like all of those things, like when you define the roles, like they don't just apply to MDM, they should apply enterprise-wide. Same to the forum. Like you shouldn't necessarily have separate ones eventually. You should have a data governance forum. This could be the starting point. Architecture. Maybe the one thing I want to call out here is that like data governance and management, at least in the experience we have, is sometimes a bit like backward looking. It's like, well, there's a mess somewhere and like data governance is getting blamed for it. Like, how do we fix it? But like there's also a forward looking, component of, you have these transformational programs, these opportunities. How do you make sure that the right trusted sources are early on in the transformation life cycle anchored in, right? Again, MDM, probably the most critical of any data asset or data product, or whatever the terminologies you may be using. So there's an opportunity here to do that, reinforce that also in a data strategy. Like, this is not optional. If this is the type of data, you manage it well, that's where you should take it from. Data quality, if you implement it for MDM, can be integrated into the solution platform itself, can be separate, but to be able to do that, like it always involves things like a process in general. Like you take business requirements, you convert them into data quality rules, you may be measuring them. So there's a process there. You may have a dashboard of sorts. Same thing as applied to the policy and standards and some of the other components is extremely reusable, right? Like the pattern here, like once you have the process defined and you start learning how to do it, is something that can then be done in, say, finance or operations or other domains. But also, and I think for me at least, more interestingly, is this kind of paradigm of data quality by design, like a little bit similar to like solving the problems of the past. Like, how do you make sure you prevent them to begin with? So if you think about MDM again in its strategic nature, how and where it is created, it's captured, and where the updates come in, like how can we just be intelligently making sure that the pipelines or the onboarding processes or the product creation processes have these very subtle checks built in, so that by design, it can't actually deviate from the patterns that you expect, or at least you have a very high degree of confidence that your MDM is going to help with that. Issue management, the same. Like, you don't need an issue management just for process, just for MDM. You can use it for anything. Then modeling and metadata is one that, if I look across these areas, probably one of the harder ones from a lot of enterprises to really get build initial maturity in. So like, having a data model that describes the concept, the domains, the logical attributes, physical attributes, where the model itself is reusable, like the meta model of sorts. And could talk about that for half an hour, just alone that. But also the actual attributes that you describe in terms of customer and products, right? They're more than any other data, continue to be reused throughout, your organization. Like Shri and I just right now are on and then Shri will mention that in one of the case studies, like where the product data, was not defined from a master and reference data perspective, which resulted in, a lot of people downstream, like creating their own definitions, their own interpretations. And so very reusable there. Storage and operations, for me, not necessarily the most interesting one for MDM, because it applies in other data types and other areas as well. But there are components of like a retention schedule, for example, or scalability, resilience, or security and encryption, those types of things, where if they aren't already summarized in, let's say, a crisp list of principles for strategic data, then this is an opportunity to do it, right? So to just summarize them and so that they can then be used in other places as well. And then finally, at least on this page, integration and interoperability, like enclosed in the definition of a data asset or a data product, is the fact that there are use cases and that it is reused. Like if it's not reused or can be reused across different domains or teams, then it's not an asset, right? That's almost enclosed in a definition. And it's the integration and interoperability here that is so key. Like what is, and it may be a common data model, maybe it's like one or two different API platforms or different protocols. It may be a dashboarding connection that you set up, but just having very clear for MDM, not just like master the data, clean it up, make sure it's well labeled, but like think about like, how do I democratize this now? How do I know that it then goes into the right use cases, relative to their requirements? Again, where those interoperability standards of sorts become super reusable, right? And then don't have a list of 25 different patterns, but usually 4 or 5 works. For different types of consumption cases, you have a different pattern. So try to be as tactical as possible, but you can see if you do it right, like how much you touch outside of the pie of just MDM. I promise this is the slide I spent the most time on. The rest will be a little faster. But so if you didn't just imagine,
hey, Willem.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have a pretty good discussion going on here, so I thought I'd have you chime in and or Shri kind of to give your thoughts. So Abhi, he says, my observation in the data governance is not just about data, but it's mindset and cultural change for some companies. How do you go about or get all the desperate siloed departments working with their own set of rules on the same page? Now, that's a big question, but any thoughts around kind of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first one now, which is in a recent case, like when we have these domains, if you will, like one could be supply chain, one could be commercial, one could be finance. Like there's a part of building a culture and socializing kind of the reciprocal nature of this domain-driven data governance thinking, right? So if I take very good care of the strategic data that I produce and create so that others can use it, there's this reciprocation that other domains can do the same, right? Because it's very easy often for some domains or use case teams to say like why something's not right? The quality is not there or it's incomplete. And so there's a socialization element here as to connecting, and that's, I think, actually flows quite nicely into what Shri's going to talk about, is not just look at this from like data for the sake of data, but you connect this to like the business domains and specific use cases that the enterprise has, and like explaining very clearly like how these types of things will help enable the use case. Because if you can't do that, if you can't measure it, I don't want to be too gloomy, but you're almost doomed. I've seen it a few times, right? Then you 2-3 years later, and yeah, it's just hard. Yeah. Not so sure, Shri, you got something to add?
Yeah, no, I would echo that, Willem. So we are definitely going to address some of that in the upcoming sections around how do you actually quantify the value of these foundations? How do you actually then turn it into a business case? What are some of the elements of that, right? The underlying steps, that you need to understand in order for us to successfully do it. So that's kind of going to be, things that we are going to talk about in a little bit. So we'll of course show that to you and get some additional thoughts from you.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yep. So if you again do it the right way or do it in a comprehensive way, you'll see a spike. If you think about maturity across kind of something like the DAMA DMBOK2 framework we flashed up a little bit earlier, you'll see a spike surely in reference and master data, because that's what you're specifically focusing on. But the key takeaway is that actually you're doing way more than just that. And so I won't kind of reiterate the points, but like you'll see that in some of them, like data governance, data quality, integration interoperability, like those jumps can be very significant. They may get you halfway. It obviously depends on your specific ambitions and current state, but they can get you very far halfway to kind of where you want to be. Others, like data security, is probably impacted to some extent, but not that foundationally from a data maturity level at an enterprise level. But that's if you to kind of like think about it in your mind, which is something that if you're a data leader, I've seen it help to at some point have a baseline, right? This is where we are today. Here's where we want to be, but then even like track that over time, right? And just that being helpful in that way, and then MDM work specifically having a big impact. Is just the point once more. So then wanted to close this kind of let's say the first part of the agenda with a story from the marketplace, because involved in how this happened in real life. So the company being in its respective kind of country, a top 3 company, was made up of 5 or 6, let's say, key business lines of insurance products. Like some were kind of family or individual oriented, some of them were car, some of them were small business, but they all had, for historical legacy reasons, they're to a very large extent power and ownership in their own processes, right? For example, leads, how they master their customer data, where they store it, etc. And so in terms of challenges, as you may expect, tough time reconciling this data, not able to truly segment customers because they only saw this one slice in these different areas, not great contact data. Then the approach was they already had a technology partner, right? They already had that. And so we came in to partner with them to kind of think about the everything around it. Like, what are the processes? What's the the data model? Like, we actually built out for them. We built them initial kind of, these are the top 15 metadata pieces you should collect, because when you do that, you can actually power up your data catalog, your very first version. We built them a mini data quality dashboard based on master data, this particular master data specifically, clarified things like ownership and stewardship. all in terms of like kind of working together with the other partner who did the implementation in that case. And so the outcomes were that they were able to create their first customer segmentation. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first time that they could kind of track someone as well, like this kind of more 360 view. But even just like the resolution of, you know, person over here who has a, you know, a car insurance is the same one who actually has you know, a family insurance over here, or life insurance over there. So it fed into predictive modeling, right? So that they could predict, specifically because they didn't know, they couldn't track them across business lines. They could now say, well, somebody clearly has a family policy that shows a lot of members of their family on it, but nothing else. Like, so how can we, you know, feed that into the algorithms to predict if there's other things that can be helped with? But then the actual thing they weren't expecting or hadn't thought about as much up front was the contact data itself, right? So not necessarily the, let's say, the intelligent predictive modeling, but just being able to get to people. It's like, you know, turned out like a lot of the customers, they would call up into one of the contact centers, but not all 5, and they didn't necessarily share it across. And so the contact data itself got a lot cleaner, and they got a lot better to be able to get to people, that the letters would actually get what they're supposed to get. And then the marketing ROI, this was anecdotally what we heard, went up as much as 50%, right? The campaigns they were able to do, the fact that they would arrive at their destination, you know, is kind of just a testimony to, if you do it right, like the impact can be very big. So Chris, unless there was any questions here on this bit, can talk.
There was just kind of one question I think you can clarify. I think it was a slide before this. Paul asked, is there a reason why document and content management capability is not part of it?
No, that can very well could have also been on here. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that is in the interpretation of DAMA, that's mostly documents, right? At least it's my interpretation. So that's more like unstructured data. So it doesn't lend itself as much for master data, which I think in pretty much all applications is structured data. So that's probably not the main one. Yeah.
Okay. And then Rajiv asks, was the MDM solution a part of the operational platform or after the fact data cleansing?
Oh, in the case study.
Yeah.
After so they were after the fact data cleansing. So they would, a little bit of history of not being able to solve the 5-6 legacy, you know, systems immediately, because you rip out, you know, the core of kind of the insurance engines. They had a cleansing algorithms and the standards that were applied at the MDM level, and then had an adoption kind of journey to be able to feed it back into the legacy systems, with the comment that the legacy systems being, like, I'm talking 2 decades old, they're very old, and so they were coming up to end of life. And so for one of them, like it was the input into the requirements, right? In terms of, you know, thinking about like fixing some of the data of the past versus also, you know, influencing, making sure you get it right next time around. Like in terms you know, think about the data model, the fields, the data quality controls, and all of that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all the questions.
Awesome. Shri, over to you.
All right. Thank you. So now let's talk about another real life example here. So this particular client is a tech-enabled product company with, I think, close to 15,000 SKUs. Obviously, maintaining clean product data is essential for any company with such a large product portfolio, as you know. So for this company, the product data was fractured, meaning that there was no consistency or uniformity of the data creation or capture across the product lifecycle. And when we think about product lifecycle here, we are talking about, you know, R&D, we are talking about manufacturing, talking about distribution, all the way to commercial operations, right? So with this company, there were 3 critical areas where the product data issue was manifesting itself into. So one was, I would say, e-commerce and customer experience. So imagine, you know, a customer browsing your website and finding 2 different product listings for the same SKU. one with an outdated product image, perhaps another with a missing product description, etc. So all of these are, manifestations of lack of good, clean product master, right? The other issue that they were running into was, within supply chain and inventory management, obviously, with not such clean product data, it could easily, manifest itself into overselling or back orders and things like that. Marketing and sales analytics was another area where they were running into some challenges. So your marketing team launches a campaign, promoting a specific product line, but without proper product data, you can't really do a closed loop analysis on ROI from that marketing investment. So all of those were, key challenges that this client ran into, right? So when we talk about master data, so in this case, product master, right? Most clients, of course, understand that there is effort and a discipline needed around master data management for product data specifically. So I've never had any challenges come up in terms of making clients see the value of master data management, right? So where we have run into challenges to be able to clearly articulate what the value is, and more importantly, be able to quantify that. So that's kind of where I want to go next, right? How do you actually do this? So if I were to look at a approach or a method by which we can try to solve for that, we would use a value driver tree as an approach to do this, right? So first off, what is a value driver tree? So it essentially is call it a blueprint or a formula for how your business generates revenue and profit, right? It's almost like a mathematical equation of sorts as to how different levers get pulled in order for you to drive revenue and profits. And this actually tends to be very industry specific, and it can also be very segment specific, right? So you can take any business problem and you can understand the underlying drivers of the problem and then translate those drivers into potentially data needs, right? So the way we use this value driver tree is in a few ways. So one, it obviously helps mapping the data to use cases and potentially to the KPIs and metrics and even to the business outcomes, right? It of course helps you prioritize these data initiatives, because once you can clearly understand the relationships on this value driver tree, it becomes pretty clear as to which data elements or sources might have the significant impact on the business value, right? So this allows organizations to then go on to prioritize their data foundations, data gathering, data collection, cleansing, all of that. Also, another one probably worth pointing out here is data gaps, right? So when you look at the value driver tree, it clearly points to what data gaps you have in terms of you not being able to activate certain use cases, right? And then last but not the least, in terms of where I want to go, is really quantification of the value of data. So you can assign a monetary or a quantitative value using this value driver tree. We're going to show you how that happens on the next few slides, but this is where really the rubber meets the road. And going back to the previous question on how do you get an organization focused on something like this, I think the value delivery part of it is absolutely critical for us to drive that business case. So in terms of making it specific, right? So if you are, for example, looking at a use case like marketing and promotions, for example, right? So you're trying to measure the ROI of a marketing campaign. So you're going to have to use some sales transaction data. You're probably going to have to use some pricing and rebate data. You're definitely going to have to use some campaign level marketing investment data, right? And all of this needs to come together in terms of measurement of ROI. So now, for the most part, all of these data sets would have an underlying foundation of some reference data, which would likely come from a customer or product master data, right? So when you look at a level like this, you're not seeing that yet. But then when you go further down to a visual like this one, this is where then you're starting to see that there is a mapping of the value driver tree down to the components or subcomponents of it. So here, again, just to be super specific here. These stars indicate where we have product data connections or linkages to those specific use cases, right? So here you can almost say that, okay, for this particular use case, does product data have a primary relevance or a secondary relevance? And then you can easily then start to translate this into what is the value of that underlying product data. So you can make this narrative around, hey, our product data drives 80% of our use cases. It is directly connected to X in value and so forth, right? So this value driver tree gets you to that kind of an endpoint. And then going back one slide here, just want to complete the thought here on how do you then take a use case and how do you assign a value to it. So typically, when we look at use cases, there are a couple of different ways to think about value. Obviously, there could be a top line value, or it could be a bottom line play, or in some use cases, it can actually be both, right? So for example, with a demand forecasting type of use case, it's actually a very powerful top line use case, but it's also a bottom line use case. And you can actually go as granular as you would want with this, right? So for example, you could say, hey, this particular top line use case, what is it being actually, what is the value driver of that? Is that through innovation? Is that through market share capture, et cetera? And so you can actually, have different levels, within these value statement, if you will. The other aspect here is, having a sense for, hey, what is the overall sort of size of the prize or the impact, with this? Is that a high, medium, or low impact in terms of use case? And this again, depends on the industry. So the same type of use case could have, different impacts depending on the type of context and the type of company and the industry. So we again, when we work with our clients, we actually leverage pretty extensive benchmarks to show that comparison for should I be going after this use case versus a different one. And then last but not the least, I guess just to have a way to prioritize this in relation to the foundation, right? Because we are looking at the impact statement here, but then you will need certain foundations in order for you to enable those use cases, and that's where we need to make the connection back to the data foundations and master data management and our ability to be able to activate these use cases. So with that, I will turn it back to Willem to complete the conversation here on the technology company example that we started talking about.
Yep, thanks, Shri. So same here, like all of the frameworks and say the theory have, they're kind of refined with marketplace experience, like how we've kind of seen it and learned it over time. So the story, just to kind of complete here for this kind of technology company, Shri kind of introduced some of it already. Globally operating, fairly complex, a lot of different SKUs, and some of the challenges that were already mentioned. There were like a lot of downstream issues because upstream they had not really figured out the product data, and specifically the mastered product data. It just led to a ton of interoperability problems comparing data from one kind of sales database to another that contained leads, for a lot of fragmentation in the landscape. But at the same time, like a lot of these executives already, the relevant executives, they would acknowledge that it is critical. They also had a very keen eye on, they were not on use cases. Like, we don't want to just do this for the sake of doing this. They had burnt themselves on kind of data governance in that sense before. So like very specifically and forceful, focusing on ROI. How do you introduce that in this discussion? And so in terms of approach, like that the company took, is it did take a comprehensive operating model approach, right? So in terms of, there's a central team. What do they do? What is done, let's say in the functions or decentrally, specifically emphasizing and prioritizing data assets, like not trying to fix all data everywhere all at once, but like focus on these assets. And then we bring in the value driver tree from externally and start to refine it. Like which of these apply in our case, which of them are, let's say, in need of better data, and others that may be fit for purpose already as it is. MDM, given that product data was just so critical for this particular context, became a natural kind of area to look at as well in terms of the enablement of the solution and the process. And then the activation of key domains and assets was done as part of the approach. And so what one of the outcomes was, before we actually even touched any data itself or starting to remediate and enhance it, was that at the highest level, there a much stronger and clearer buy-in specifically for mastering product data. Like they kind of knew why, but being able to put a value driver tree in front of them where some of the operational leads would recognize areas that they own and drive, some of the commercial use cases that other executives were in charge of, some of the also the risk. There was in the one we used here had a very specific compliance and risk branch as well, like how and the data that depended on those. And so it's specific, just coming back all the way to kind of master data, and in this particular example, the product master data, turned out that from that whole list of over 100 data-driven use cases, 40% had a primary or secondary connection to the master product data. And so you can imagine that with this, it almost became a bit of a like a no regrets, like no, it was very data driven in terms of making sure that would now be prioritized and is indeed being prioritized. And so focus on a tangible ROI, like those 40% of use cases, like in this case, not just a one-time, pulse check, but like make sure that these people who know that they have a dependency on this data continue to make sure that the value statements are confirmed and actually tracked, right? So maybe there's, some update upstream that had an impact downstream, or new data that would help it even more. And I guess most impactfully here, sustainable ownership around the master data, right? So the solution, the platform already had an owner, but like now the domain was defined, it had an owner, like the attributes were assigned to subdomains, right? The consumers also had roles and responsibilities. Like you can't just grow some of this data somewhere else. So you have to take it from the right place, and you also have a responsibility to actually communicate your requirements. Like the people can't just infer it, from something. So in any case, the transformation is still full swing. So we'll track the impact, but more importantly, so will they, right? They will have a very direct line into the impact that it will have. And so that it's not just a, let's say, tech only or data only story, but really kind of connects back to that value driver tree and the use case and the impact associated with that. With that, Chris, that's it.
Great. Are there any other questions before we kind of adjourn here? I don't see any, but just want to thank you, Willem and Shri, for coming today. This is really awesome. Looks like a question did come in, but before I ask that particular question, again, this is going to be recorded or is being recorded, and we will post this out to the community.reltio.com. And at the end of this, and when you leave, please take the survey. It will pop up after Zoom. All feedback is good. It's a gift. So anything that you can do from a feedback standpoint is helpful. The question, Willem, is, in addition to showing data quality issues, does Reltio have the ability to recommend any resolutions approaches for the data quality issue? So that is not for you, Willem. That is for Reltio. So Sanjeev, I'll have to get back to you on that particular question as soon as I can. So I will definitely ask that. So let's see if this couple more questions are coming in from Shri's use case. So attributes like COGS, overhead, et cetera, are critical, but not master data. They are the transactional data. Is that right? So you blended that with master data to calculate the ROI. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that's
I can
absolutely
maybe
right.
you go first.
Yeah, so I think there is a combination of transactional data and master data, but I think it's very important to understand that the transactional data needs that master data reference in order for the use case to be activated, right? So that's kind of what this page was trying to show, that for each and every use case here, there may be other data sets involved, but here is the linkage back to the product master data. Sorry, Willem, you were saying something.
No, exactly. That's also something often the primary versus secondary, right? Like sometimes it was directly used as a direct input into some of these analyses or data-driven use cases. And sometimes, as you say, like there's a transactional process, but it can't actually capture. That's one example here. Like it couldn't actually capture some of the feedback from customers because the master data didn't give the opportunity to do so. So there was no way to kind of bubble them back up. So yeah, and then in that case, it's secondarily, like it through transactional data. Yep.
Yeah, really great. And so just some feedback here was thanks so very much. Insightful, delightful session. Thank you. Great presentation. Very useful, very helpful. So with that, thank you everyone for coming to another community show. We will have another couple coming up next week and to the following weeks. Willem, Shri, wow. I loved it, and it sounds like some others really liked it too. And so thank you for your time and efforts here. And so any last parting words, Willem, Shri?
No, thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. Thank you all for joining us. So look forward to meeting you all maybe on a different occasion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.